Hello and welcome to another hints and tips video with me, Captain Scouse. Today I'm going to give you some hints and tips on buying and selling comics. So our first tip for this video is to know your comics. Now when I first started off collecting comics, I didn't have a single clue about this until I started looking to add to my collections. Most of the time I used to use local comic book shops where I'd sometimes get hold of some real nice deals. However, when I started to pre-order comics that I thought I want to add to my collection from a local comic book shop, I found out trying to pre-order ones was mostly impossible. Or you'd find that weeks later they still couldn't get hold of them when it's been released. So I started pre-ordering online uh, after I found out I couldn't use comic book shops with that sort of method, and started using sites like eBay. And that's when I started spotting that comics are more than just what you read. They've also got things like grading numbers that you need to keep an eye out on that. And we're going to talk about that in one of our other tips later on. But when I first started off a collection, I grew up somewhere in the 90s, where I used to watch TV shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and that. And later on, like more recently, I've started coming across things like their comics for that. So when it's come to collecting comics that you grew up watching TV shows and thinking, oh yeah, I want to collect more of that, whether or not it's Marvel, DC, some independent comics as well that you're interested in, you'll normally find that trying to start a collection off with that is a bit difficult. So know what your comic is and what comics you want to go is a good starting base to what you want to go for. And like I said, we will start off with one of the most popular other tips that you need to know besides knowing your comic. And that is knowing what the grading's all about regarding a comic, which can be quite a minefield. And this leads us to our second tip. And with that in mind, it is important as a collector to know what grade your comic is. Now, when I first started off, I had to research looking at several comics for gradings. Then I asked the question to myself, why do comics need to be graded and who grades them? The answer to that I found was when I spotted a comic in a comic book shop that had or was encased in plastic. Now, I looked at it and spotted it had a little number on the top, and it was done by CGC. And I wondered, who are these companies that are doing these? So, my first year of collecting comics, of course, I did my research and looked at them. And I realized CGC were one of the US based comic grading companies that um, was responsible for grading comics. So, if you've got an old comic that you want to grade and things like that, you send it to them. They charge you like a flat fee for it all, and they actually encase it in this plastic and do it. And I thought, that looks really good. But why would you want to do that as a collector? And it wasn't until I started getting pre-orders and I started looking at my pre-orders, I spotted online that a lot of sellers, comic book sellers and that, was selling these types of comics for 100 to 200 pounds or dollars, whatever you found them. And these were modern comics. Some of them like first editions of certain characters like Spider Gwen or something like that. And you go, oh, okay, that's an interesting fact to know and things like that. But it just makes them more valuable and collectible. Now, there's more than just one company that do this that I know of. There is a sort of UK based grading company that do that for the EU, and it's called Eurograder.com. Now, they're quite local to where I am at the moment. I've never used them before, but I once, when I did a pre order for a comic collection, in my little box that I got all my comics in, I had a little flyer which advertised this company. And I looked at it and thought, oh, they grade comics as well at the same time. I thought, that's brilliant. So I was really interested in how they do things. There is a US version, there's a UK version. Of course, both the markets are different when you find them and look them up on eBay, because that's where they're mostly for sale. However, with eBay, they, like I said with Funko Pops in the last video, they tend to price them around what the US market is for these. So that's one thing for you to know. Another thing you need to know about comics is, especially when it comes to them being graded, and sometimes you'll find there's a lot of comics that you get that aren't in these plastic containers or aren't officially graded by CGC or Eurograder. Is that a lot of sellers, especially other collectors and other comic book sellers online, will class them as fine, very fine, and normally that has initials on them, which is FN slash VF, which means fine, very fine. And a website that I found when I first started collecting called nostalmania.com. I put the useful link there if you want to have a look at it there. They on that website you will find examples of what a graded comic like a 7.0 or a 9.2 comic will look like. And next to it, you'll find these little numbers that tell you what class they are, whether or not they're fine, very fine, in the initials that they have. But that tells the seller, or that lets the seller tell the collector that this is like a grading so and so, so and so. So when another person does a research who wants to buy it to find out how much it would cost normally, um, they'd look at the history and think, okay, then that's worth so and so, because it's that grading. And with the photo, like say for example, if it's a grading 7.0, it would show minor wear is flat and clean with a good eye for appeal. And that just makes it possible for you to sell it a bit more better. And collectors like to know what grading the comic is and when to do it. Now, yes, there's a lot of a comic can change in a way when you buy it online. You can find that the grading number could be a bit different. If not, it won't be that much difference with the grading. But it took me about a year or two to get to understand how the comic grading system works. So I've included in this video three uh, websites for you to check up on if you're interested in understanding more about your comic grading system. Anything else, I always say research it if you're going to do comic gradings. Without having that on, people are just going to assume it's a brand new comic. But when you're selling used comics, on which you are doing as a collector, you need to have your comic grading number on it. Now we come on to a third tip, and that is to keep a list of comics on eBay, like a price list of them all. Now, when I first started off, I used to buy a load of comics coming in, and I'll just used to sort of say, right, I bought it for that much. Um, so I'd keep the receipts on like an email system, and I'd sort of say, right, I bought that for like £2, £3, and then I'd look at probably later on, or I'd notice later on that it was worth a lot more. Especially with lenticular comics that I've bought in the past for like £3, £4, and I found out they're worth £10, £20 a month or two later because they stopped selling them, and a lot of sellers hype the price up, especially on eBay, just like they do with Funko Pops. They hype the price up with them. So I started keeping a database, like a spreadsheet database of every comic I bought, and I still do to this day. I tend to list the artists that are involved in the comic making and the comic production of it. I also did the year, the month, the issue number, the volume number, the title of the comic, especially if we're doing a collection like that. And next to it, I would give it not just only just the grading, what we've just explained, but also the price I bought it for. The reason of that is sometimes I've gone into a comic book shop locally, and for example, I bought a cheap comic for £1. I say Black Widow Volume One, and I got two out of the three issues. And I managed to think, okay, I got them for £1 each. Let me see how much they are worth online. And I find out because they're the first volume of Black Widow from her own individual series, I decided that wow, they're worth quite a bit. And I found out later on they were worth quite a bit, especially with the grading marks on them and things like that. So I kept a list of how much I bought it for, to how much I want to sell it for, and that sort of gave me an idea to how much I could sell it for. Like I say, you've also got to think as well as a buyer. That when you look at a list of comics that you want to get from elsewhere and you're buying to add to a collection, let's say, for example, that Black Widow comics that I've got, I had to search for the third issue of a collection of three. And I searched three different online shops for them to find the cheapest one. Now, on eBay, you do have to think about postage and packaging. Like with Forbidden Planet, when you're buying new comics or pre ordered comics, is that you have to take into account postage and packaging on top of the comics. Now, the comics themselves will be like £2, £3, very cheap to buy, but postage will be pound to even £2.50. It depends on where you get it from to add on per comic. Sometimes they'll do, if you do multiple comics, you'll get a bit of a discount because they send them all in one. It's the same with eBay as well. Now, eBay depends on which shop you buy it from and where it's more independent in that sort of way. I've found some collectors will charge like £2, £3 for a comic, um, but then they'll put like £4.99 possibly something like that for the postage. And then when you've added a collection up that you want to buy, like a bulk of them, you then have to wait for the seller to come back for you to always worth requesting a complete total before you buy it because you'll more than likely get a discount on your postage. So it's worth doing that if you're going to buy off like on eBay and that. With other websites, like I said, Forbidden Planet, you're more likely to get an automatic discount at the end of the sale. So when you get to the counter or the end of the basket of it all, you normally find there's all calculations of a bit of a discount if you can get it on there like that. So it's worth looking at that and keeping a price list. Like I said, start off with a database. I never, when it comes to my collection, add the postage to it. I never do for the price of the comic because you want to keep that separate. So always worth knowing you keep your postage and packaging separate from the price you bought the comic. So with that in mind, you have to keep an eye on like a price list of it all. That also goes on to selling comics as well for when you want to sell comics, which we'll talk about later on in another tip. Now we move on to our fourth tip for this video. And if you're looking to start a collection, I suggest you start looking from collecting pre-orders first. The best place to find them is actual comic book shops where you live or websites such as Forbidden Planet. With Forbidden Planet, you're more likely to get them quite cheap. Like I've explained before with other tips that we've done in this video, is that they'll show them for like £2, £3. This is from 2013 prices for this year. However, you will have to add possibly something like £1. They've just recently gone up to £2.50 recently. Not sure why, but they have just done that just this month for every comic you add on an online basket. Now, I found out that you can add what they will do now, because before what they used to do when it used to be £1 per comic for deliveries, used to be £1 for each comic. And I think after 3 comics, they cap them to around £3. So if you ordered like 5 comics, you then find out you only have to pay like £3 for the total delivery. However, recently they start doing a percentage discount for every comic you add onto it. So I am not sure how the new system works, but I have recently bought 2 comics, and where the postage was like £2.50 each or £2.25 each, they capped it at 220, 275 for 2 comics, which is still more than the pound per comic, but it's still worth figuring that out now. So at the moment, it's still just as cheap to buy it from somewhere like Forbidden Planet as it is in the actual comic book shop. Now, with UK comic book shops, you will find with pre-ordered comics that you can go in there and pre-order it. There is a bit of difficulty on that, but you can go in on the day it's released. And most of the time, and this isn't worth doing when you start a collection, and you find a shelf with the comics on them, is that most of the time they won't come bag and board. Online, when you buy them offline, they will come sort of bagged, maybe not boarded, but you'll get them sort of bagged at least. However, the ones you buy in the shops won't have the bags and boards on them. However, you'll find somewhere on a shelf somewhere the price converted from dollars to pounds or whatever country you live in. Is what they've got going on. So sometimes you can get a good deal, sometimes you don't have a good deal. It depends what you're going for. But I first started off getting collectible comics via in an actual bookshop or comic book shop. I did, and then I decided to go online to add more to my collection that way. But I always think if you're first starting off with a collection and you want to find out more about it, start off and research which comic you want to get. Some collections are like 50 issues. Some are like how can I put it? Some are like 4 or 5 issues for mini issues that you can get, and you're more likely to get them like released once a month if you're going to get that like that. So when you're into DC and Marvel or whatever, keep an eye on what you want to collect. And once you've bookmarked it on somewhere like Forbidden Planet, or you put a pre-order inquiry in with a actual comic book shop, you're more likely to keep that going like that. They will probably charge you to have it delivered to you in a comic book shop, but I am not sure if some shops will allow you to go there, pick it up, or whatever you want to do with that. But I do suggest, as my fourth tip, that you start off with pre-orders first. Now we go on to tip 5, and I'm calling this comic bewares because you have to beware of buying comics through trading companies, independent traders as such, who sometimes specialize in vintage comics. Now, you will sometimes find some cheap bargain boxes that are sometimes between £1 to £3. However, they are also trying to sell high end comics that haven't been properly graded over £100 or so. Like we explained before, you can get hold of the fully graded comics, official graded comics that are cased in plastic and all that lot. However, they will try and sell unverified via professionals comics that are over £100 and that. And this is where I'm on about with you being beware of comics that you want to buy, vintage comics, is that sort of thing. Um, for example, we once had a seller come into us with a volume 1, issue 1 of a Wolverine comic from, I think it was like the late 80s, early 90s. And we ended up buying it for around £35. As we examined it, one of my colleagues thought it was worth over £100 because he was only looking at eBay alone. And with that, you have the US market that is just on there. So it's a completely different market to the UK. However, our boss, after telling him and explaining him to that it could be worth between 50 to 100 to upon what we thought it would be. Now, I have other apps that I use on my phone called Key Collector app, and that's available on Android. I am not sure if it's available on iPhone, but you can go and check it out if you want. And I found out the copy that we had was a normal first edition and first sort of volume, first issue one, which was worth around £80. However, because there was two listed on there, my colleague decided to price this at the variant price that he had found on eBay. And the difference was between the two was a little icon where the Spider-Man from the 1990s wasn't on the bottom left-hand side of it. It was something else to indicate it was a variant. I think this was before the time of barcodes on comics at the same time. So that was the only way you could tell what was a variant and what wasn't. So I sort of sold him, it's a normal one, just as he was pricing it up. I said, so it's worth about £80. He decided, well, I'm going to list it as £105 online and see if it'll go for sale. Now, as far as I'm aware, that hasn't gone for sale. We still have a load of collections like that which are overpriced and not professionally graded by grading officials, or people not doing the proper research on that. So it's worth researching the comic you want to buy before buying it, and use a few apps rather than just relying on eBay. Like I said, I use Key Collector app, and that is pretty good. That tends to show, it doesn't show as many comics as you want, but it goes around and it actually shows you the grading. I think it's the grading as well, to what grade you would have this comic at, to what I think it was an 8.5 we graded it at. And so I came up with the price for an 8.5 for that comic on this app. And it's so wonderful. It allows you to compare it to what you find elsewhere online. So it's always worth relying on, not just relying on eBay, but the apps as well that can help you with that to grade it. So just beware when it comes to buying vintage comics. And like I said, you normally see it at Comic Cons where they overprice comics that they do with Funko Pops. Beware that they will triple the price on them just to get the collectors that are there to overspend on the comics that are there. So worth keeping an eye out on that, and to use the apps and just use whatever methods you can to find a vintage comics that's in your budget. Now we move on to our last tip for this video, and that is selling. As for selling, eBay is the best place to sell comics if you're interested in selling a small collection. Like I say, selling on eBay is there for those who have got a large collection and you just want to spend a bit of time just selling as many comics as you want over a bit of time, and you're not got the time scale to do it. You sort of don't mind the time scale. I know of a few people who have done that, and they've got boxes of comics. I know of one person who sold boxes of comics over a period of years, probably about 10 years, who made 30,000 quid and things like that off them. Probably enough to buy a house if they want to do it. That's what it's been like for some of them. But they've played the long game with eBay. It's always worth playing the long game if you're going to sell your comics that way. Make sure you put a reasonable price on your packaging and postage, and that you are sort of put discounts in for people who want to buy multiple comics, and just have a supply of postage material as well if you're going to do it that way. Is probably what I would say if you're going to do it. Research, like I said, if you've done a research and you kept a price of how much it's worth, it's always worth doing it that way. You can probably make more money from the postage with comics than you can do the comic itself, regarding what I've seen on eBay and that. So it's always worth researching the market. We always say research your market in that sort of side of it. When it comes to selling them at comic book shops, people who buy and sell comics in stores, we sometimes get collectors come in who tell us they know what their comic is worth and what they're looking for with a deal. Sometimes it's like swapsies. They want to swap a comic for a certain comic. We've had people do that to us to swap from one to the other for collections. Especially if you've got multiple ones of a certain edition of a comic. Like you said, you've got two Spider-Man ones of the same issue, and you want to sell one or whatever, or do a trade deal. They'll sometimes do that. What we tend to do if they come with a large collection or a specific collection of a specific comic that they think is so special, we get them to talk about it. And whether it's the first edition of Wolverine or something along those lines, they always come in and say, I know how much it's worth. I can give you a bit of history about it and all that lot. It's the first edition of so and so. It's the first appearance of them. It's that sort of information. It's worth putting into a comic if you're going to sell it. And as well as that, like we explained before, make sure you put a grade to what you think the grading comic is. Now, it might not be an official grade unless you've got a plastic encased comic that has been officially graded, but beware of wiggle room when it comes to selling things that you're estimating yourself what grade your comic is worth, as many don't do that when you buy them. So it's worth you doing that, and basically just, if you're playing the long game, have fun with it. Just see what you can make of it. Start off with a small collection and see where you go with that, like you would do with Funko Pops. You start off with a small collection, and yeah, just have a bit of fun selling what comics you've got spares of, and just see where you go with that. And that is it. I hope you've enjoyed the hints and tips I have given you in this video. And if you would like more hints and tips, then do feel free to hit that subscribe button and join me for the next one.